They didn't even look at me when they said it. My mother was stirring tea at the kitchen counter, the spoon clinking softly against the cup. My father sat at the dining table, glasses low on his nose, reading something on his phone. My brother leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, a faint smile tugging at his lips like he already knew how this conversation would end. "You tried," my mother said finally, still not turning around. "But some people just aren't meant to succeed." The word failed wasn't spoken, but it hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. I stood there with my hands clasped together, nails pressing into my palms. I had come home that evening not to ask for money, not to beg for help, but to share news I thought, foolishly, might change how they saw me. But the moment I walked in, I knew it wouldn't matter. The judgment was already decided. The verdict had been written long before I opened my mouth. My brother chuckled softly. "At least you tried being something," he said. "That's more than most people like you do." People like you. I swallowed. I'd heard that phrase my whole life. People like me didn't win. People like me didn't stand out. People like me existed only as examples of what not to become. I nodded once. What else was there to do? In this family, silence had always been my safest response. They loved to remind me how different we were. My brother, the golden child. Straight A's, confident smile, always surrounded by admiration. Me, the quiet one who took longer paths, made unconventional choices, and never seemed to deliver results fast enough to satisfy anyone. "Your brother is getting engaged next month," my father said, finally looking up. "His fiancée comes from a very respectable family, successful, educated. You should learn something from him." The words stung, but I forced a small smile. "I'm happy for him." My brother smirked. "You should be. Not everyone gets a life worth celebrating." That night, I lay awake in my childhood bedroom, staring at the ceiling fan as it spun slowly above me. I replayed every word, every look, every unspoken comparison. I wondered, not for the first time, how it felt to be someone they were proud of. By morning, I had decided something important. I would stop explaining myself. If they thought I had failed, I would let them believe it. If they were comfortable placing me at the bottom of their expectations, I would stay there, quietly, patiently. Because what they didn't know was that the story they had written for me was missing several chapters. And those chapters were about to walk into this house wearing a polite smile, holding my brother's hand, and asking a single question that would change everything. The engagement dinner was held at our house, because of course it was. My mother insisted the living room be rearranged, the good plates taken out, the kind we only used when guests were important enough to impress. I arrived early, not because I was asked to help, but because I knew if I showed up late, it would become another quiet mark against me. Another reason to roll eyes. Another story they could tell without me in the room. I wore a simple shirt and clean shoes. Nothing flashy. Nothing that might suggest I was trying too hard to belong. The doorbell rang just after sunset. My brother straightened instantly, like a soldier being called to attention. "That'll be her," he said, excitement barely contained. My mother rushed to the door, smoothing her hair, her smile already prepared. When the door opened, the room seemed to brighten. She stepped in gracefully, confident but not loud, dressed elegantly without trying to steal attention. Her eyes scanned the room with calm curiosity, absorbing details, reading people the way some people read books. She shook my parents' hands politely, addressing them with warmth and respect. "This is my fiancée," my brother said proudly, placing a hand on her back. "The one I told you about." She smiled at him, then turned toward me. "And you must be." Before she could finish, my brother interrupted. "Oh, him," he laughed lightly. "That's my sibling, the artistic one." My mother chuckled. "Yes, very creative, always had big dreams, just never really went anywhere with them." There it was, the public version of my failure, served casually like an appetizer. I felt my chest tighten, but I kept my expression neutral. I had practiced this face for years. The face that said I don't mind. The face that made other people comfortable saying things they shouldn't. She tilted her head slightly, studying me. "Nice to meet you," she said sincerely. "Likewise," I replied. We moved to the dining table. Plates clinked. Food was served. Conversation flowed easily, except whenever it drifted near me. "So," my brother said loudly, halfway through the meal, "I was telling her how I've basically had to carry the responsibility of this family. Some people just don't step up." My father nodded. "True, not everyone has the drive." My mother added, "We always worried about what would happen to them once we're gone." They spoke about me as if I wasn't sitting right there. I focused on my plate, chewing slowly, letting the words wash over me. Each one landed with familiar weight. I had learned long ago that defending myself only made things worse. Silence, at least, denied them the satisfaction of my reaction. But then she spoke. "Oh," she said softly, "what kind of work do you do?" Every pair of eyes turned toward me. Before I could answer, my brother laughed again. "That's a complicated question." "It's not," she said gently, still looking at me. I met her gaze. For the first time that evening, I felt seen, not judged, not dismissed, just noticed. "I work independently," I said carefully. "I'm involved in projects most people don't understand at first glance." My brother snorted. "See, always vague, always mysterious. That's how you know there's nothing solid there." My mother smiled apologetically at her. "We've tried to help, really, but you can't push someone who doesn't want to be practical." There was an awkward pause. I expected her to nod politely, maybe offer a sympathetic smile, the kind outsiders give when they quietly agree with the family's assessment. I had seen it before. Friends, relatives, even strangers eventually accepted the story my family told about me. But she didn't. Instead, she asked another question. "How long have you been doing this?" "Several years," I replied. "And you support yourself with it?" "Yes." My brother shifted in his seat. "Barely." She didn't look at him. "Do you enjoy it?" I hesitated, then nodded. "Very much." She smiled, really smiled this time. "That matters." The room went quiet. My mother cleared her throat. "Well, enjoyment doesn't pay bills." She turned to my mother politely. "Actually, in my experience, people who enjoy what they do often end up being very good at it." My brother's jaw tightened. "You're being generous." "No," she said calmly. "I'm being curious." Then she looked back at me. "Have we met before?" The question hung in the air, strange and unexpected. I frowned slightly. "I don't think so." She studied my face again, more intently now, as if searching her memory. Something flickered in her eyes, recognition, confusion, maybe both. "That's odd," she murmured. "I could swear." My brother laughed nervously. "You're imagining things." Maybe she was. Or maybe the story my family told about me was about to crack, right there at the dinner table, under the weight of a single unfinished thought. The rest of the dinner passed with forced laughter and carefully chosen topics. My parents talked about wedding venues. My brother boasted about his plans, his future, his certainty that life would continue bending in his favor. I stayed quiet. Not because I had nothing to say, but because I was watching. I noticed how she listened more than she spoke, how her eyes followed the conversation, catching details others missed. When my brother exaggerated a story, she didn't correct him, but her smile tightened just enough to show she had noticed. When my mother spoke about practical people, her gaze flicked briefly toward me, thoughtful rather than dismissive. At one point, my father asked my brother about his work, praising him loudly. I watched as she nodded politely, but her attention drifted again, back to me. As if I were a puzzle she hadn't meant to pick up, but now couldn't put down. After dinner, my mother insisted on showing her old family photos. Albums were pulled out, stories repeated. I stood slightly apart, near the window, watching the reflection of the room in the glass. In that reflection, I saw what I always saw, myself on the edge, present but never central. She wandered over, while the others laughed at some childhood story of my brother's. "They don't talk about you much," she said quietly. I smiled faintly. They never have. That must be hard. I shrugged. You get used to it. She studied my face again. You really don't fit the picture they paint. Before I could respond, my brother called her name. Come see this one. This was the science fair I won. She glanced back at him, then at me. We'll talk later, she said. Later. The word echoed in my mind, longer than it should have. As the evening wound down, coats were gathered, goodbyes exchanged. At the door, she turned once more. It was very nice meeting you, she said. I hope we get the chance to talk again. So do I replied honestly. When the door closed behind them, the house felt heavier. My brother scoffed. I don't know why she kept looking at you like that. My mother frowned. Don't get ideas. People like her live in a different world. I said nothing. Because deep down, I knew something they didn't. That look in her eyes wasn't pity. It was recognition. And recognition, once awakened, doesn't stay quiet for long. It happened 2 days later. I hadn't expected to see her again so soon, and definitely not alone. I was at a small cafe near the co-working space I used a few times a week, sitting by the window with my laptop open, finishing up some work before a call. The place was quiet, soft music, low voices, the kind of environment where thoughts settled instead of racing. Excuse me. I looked up. It was her. For a second, neither of us spoke. She seemed almost relieved, like someone who had been searching for something and finally found it where they least expected. I hope this isn't strange, she said, taking the seat across from me without waiting for an answer. But I couldn't stop thinking about you. I smiled slightly. That makes 2 of us. She exhaled, then leaned forward. After the dinner, something kept bothering me. The way they talked about you, it didn't match the impression I had. And what impression was that? That you were someone who chose silence because explaining yourself wasn't worth the effort. I paused. You're not wrong. She nodded, then reached into her bag and pulled out her phone. I work in business development, she said. Part of my job is recognizing patterns, names, ideas, projects. When you spoke about what you do, something clicked, but I couldn't place it at first. She unlocked her phone, scrolled, then turned the screen toward me. My name. Displayed clearly, professionally, attached to a project overview. My chest tightened, not with fear, but with something close to disbelief. She looked up slowly, eyes wide now, no trace of doubt left. Wait, she said quietly, almost to herself. You're the one who built this. I nodded once. Her lips parted. This framework, my company studied it last year. We used it as a reference case. I closed my laptop gently. It's been around longer than people realize. She leaned back, shaking her head in disbelief. They said you never went anywhere. I let out a soft breath. People see what they're prepared to see. She was silent for a long moment, processing. Then she smiled, not the polite smile from dinner, but something sharper, brighter. Do they have any idea who you actually are? No, I said, and I don't plan on telling them. Her eyebrows lifted. Why not? Because, I said calmly, the truth doesn't need defending, it only needs time. She laughed softly. Your family is going to be very surprised. Maybe, I replied, or maybe they'll never understand. Either way, I'm done chasing their approval. She studied me with something new in her gaze now, respect. I think, she said slowly, that meeting you was the most unexpected part of that dinner. And I think, I said, standing up, that this conversation is just getting started. As we parted, one thought settled firmly in my mind. The label they had placed on me was about to collapse. Not because I demanded it, but because someone else had finally seen past it. The shift didn't happen loudly. There was no dramatic announcement, no moment where I walked into the house and demanded attention. That would have been too easy, too predictable. Instead, it happened the way real power shifts do, quietly, while everyone was busy assuming nothing had changed. A week later, my family gathered again. This time it was supposed to be casual. Tea, conversation, wedding logistics, the usual stage where I existed as background noise. But something was different the moment she walked in. She greeted my parents warmly, hugged my brother, then paused when she saw me. Just for a second, long enough for others to notice. Her smile toward me was not polite. It was knowing. My brother caught it immediately. His posture stiffened. "You two seem familiar," he said lightly. She laughed. We ran into each other. My mother's eyes flicked between us. "Oh." "Yes," she said, taking a seat beside me instead of next to my brother. "We had coffee." The room shifted. My brother cleared his throat. "Since when do you have time for random coffee meetings?" She tilted her head. "Since I realized not everyone in this family has been fairly represented." Silence. I said nothing. I didn't need to. She turned to my father. "You mentioned last time that your child never found anything stable." My father nodded cautiously. "Yes, unfortunately." She smiled gently. "That's interesting, because the company I work with has studied their work extensively." My brother laughed, sharp and forced. "You're mixing things up." "No," she said calmly. "I'm being precise." She looked at me. "Would you mind explaining your project, briefly?" Every instinct in me said to deflect, to minimize, to stay invisible. But I didn't. I spoke simply, clearly, without defending myself. I explained what I did, who used it, and why it mattered. Without names, without numbers, without ego. When I finished, the room was silent again. But this time it wasn't dismissive. It was unsettled. My mother frowned. "Why didn't you ever tell us?" I met her eyes. "You never asked." My brother stared at his hands. She stood up then, smoothing her jacket. "I think honesty matters," she said, "especially before a marriage." No one stopped her. As she left, she glanced back at me once more. The look said everything. The story my family had told about me was breaking. And this time, I wasn't the one trying to fix it. The house stayed quiet long after she left. Not the comfortable kind of quiet. This one pressed in on everyone, exposing things that had been carefully avoided for years. My parents sat across from each other, tea growing cold in their cups. My brother stared at the floor like it had suddenly become interesting. For once, no one spoke over me. My mother was the first to break the silence. "We didn't know," she said, as if that explained everything. I nodded slowly. "I know." My father sighed, rubbing his temples. "You should have told us." I met his gaze, steady and calm. "You were never listening." The words weren't sharp. They didn't need to be. Truth carries its own weight when it's finally allowed into the room. My brother scoffed weakly. "So what now?" he asked. "We're just supposed to pretend you're successful." I turned toward him. "No, you're supposed to stop pretending I was a failure." He opened his mouth, then closed it again. For the first time in his life, he didn't have a clever remark ready. Days passed. Then something unexpected happened. She called me. "I wanted you to hear it from me first," she said. "I postponed the wedding." I didn't react right away. "Because of me." "Because of what I learned," she corrected. "About you, about him, about how easily your family accepted a story without ever questioning it." I exhaled slowly. "That must have been hard." "It was necessary," she replied. "I can't build a future on selective truth." When my family found out, the house exploded with arguments, accusations, disbelief. My brother blamed me. My mother cried. My father paced the room like control was something he had misplaced. I listened. And then, for the first time, I spoke, not to explain myself, but to set a boundary. "I don't need apologies," I said quietly. "I need respect, and if that's too much to ask, then distance will have to do." They looked at me differently then. Not with pride, not yet, but with uncertainty. Weeks later, I ran into her again, this time by choice. We talked about work, about life, about the strange ways truth surfaces when it's least expected. "You know," she said with a small smile. They still don't fully understand you. I smiled back. They don't have to. Because the real victory wasn't being recognized. It was being free. Free from the labels. Free from the silence I was forced into. Free from needing anyone else to validate a life I had already built. They said I failed. But failure, I learned, is often just success that chose a quieter path. And sometimes, all it takes is one honest voice to finally say, "Wait, you're the one who was right all